We're going to go back to Canberra now and catch up with Labor's Matt Thistlethwaite, who's been freed from the incursions of democracy down there in the chamber. Thanks for joining us, Matt. Just briefly, I want to get your thoughts on the coronavirus, what this is doing to the economy, and just how worried we should be about all that.
Well, it is deeply disturbing, Chris. The disease is spreading. We know that Australia's trade is intimately linked to China, and we're facing the prospect of a downturn in our economy. But I have to say, Chris, that the Australian economy's been struggling for some time now, long before coronavirus, long before the trade war between Trump and China.
Sure has been sluggish for a long while.
Below trend growth, very low wages growth, high levels of household debt, small businesses in particular struggling. So the government just hasn't had a plan to reboot the economy, to get it on trend growth again. And I think that, unfortunately, the coronavirus is going to make a bad situation worse.
Yeah, I don't think there's much doubt about that. You'd have to cut them some slack, though, wouldn't you, if they don't deliver their surplus, because they've been hit by the coronavirus and the bushfires to some extent as well.
Well, look, that's up to them to explain to the Australian public. They were out there with all of the mugs saying back in the black. In the MyEFO, they said that they'd be able to reach a surplus. Who knows, they may still do that, but it's not looking good, and they're going to have to explain that to the Australian public on budget night in May.
Yeah, we'll see. Now, Matt Thistlethwaite, on climate policies, do you believe that Australian emission reductions policies can reduce the bushfire threat in Australia?
Look, I believe that Australian emission reductions policies, Chris, can contribute to reducing global emissions, and that's what we need to do as a country. Australia is one of many nations that signed up to the Paris Accord, which is aimed at limiting global warming to that 1.5 to 2 degree scenario to avoid the catastrophic consequences of climate change. And for our country, the losses could be rather dire indeed. And we're talking about the Great Barrier Reef being wiped out and all of the tourism that goes with that. We're talking about extended droughts and the effects that will have on agriculture and farming. And indeed, CSIRO and other organisations have said you'll get extended bushfire season. So we think we need to do our bit internationally to reduce global emissions and to avoid catastrophic consequences of climate change.
Yeah, but you'd have to concede that what we've done so far, and we have reduced our emissions over the last decade or so, what we've done so far has contributed nothing to any environmental improvement because global emissions have increased dramatically. We'd be mad as a country to go much further, wouldn't we, until the rest of the world is also acting?
Well, the rest of the world is acting, Chris, particularly European nations, many nations in Asia.
Hang on,
are starting to act.
Global emissions are rising dramatically by more than our total emissions annually. So, I mean, you can't. It's just a nonsense to say the rest of the world is acting while global emissions are increasing.
Well, emissions in certain countries throughout the world are falling, particularly in those European countries where they've had a carbon price for many, many years now. Unfortunately, in Australia, emissions have been increasing in recent years. We've had a very small increase in the last 12 months, but they have been increasing.
Decrease. It's a very small decrease. Yeah, I agree. It's about Australia doing its bit. Yeah, exactly. But this is exactly my point. We shouldn't do any more than our bit until the rest of the world is actually reducing emissions, should we? Because what we're doing at the moment is not actually contributing to any resolution. China, India, Indonesia, all these countries are massively increasing their emissions.
Yeah, but for Australia to have any credibility in those international forums, Chris, to argue that China and India and other nations should be doing a lot more, you need to be able to have credentials to say that, well, look, we've been doing our bit here in Australia, and compared to other nations, that can't be said of what's been going on with this government. I mean, they dismantled a price on carbon. They tried to remove the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, Australian Renewable Energy Agency. They've undermined the uptake of renewable energy, and emissions have been going up. So we don't have that credibility internationally anymore.
You're pretty down on Australia. You guys were in power for half of the last decade. Is there another country in the world that has paid a higher economic price to do more on emissions reduction than Australia?
Well, you know, when Labor was in government, we certainly put in place the mechanisms to reduce emissions and to try and grow our economy, and electricity prices were much cheaper. And now those policies were working, Chris. We saw emissions under Labor were falling. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation was established. That's financed billions of dollars worth of investment in renewable energy projects throughout the country. So they're policies that have been working.
Yeah, so win the next election and you can get back to that. But my question was, name a country that has paid a higher economic price doing more to reduce emissions than Australia.
Well, it's about Australia playing its part internationally. There are plenty of countries. But this is my point.
We're playing our part.
I
don't think you can come up with a country that has paid a higher economic price to reduce emissions as substantially as Australia. I stand to be corrected. Just name the country.
Well, there are plenty of European countries that have done more than we have in terms of emission reductions. But at the same time, they've been able to grow their economies and create new industries, particularly countries like Germany, even the UK.
Germany's power prices 50% higher than us. They're missing their emissions reductions targets, and they're facing supply security problems.
The UK has been very successful in reducing their emissions. They
have nuclear power. They switch from coal to gas. Yeah.
And creating jobs at the same time. And the international community's come together, Chris, to say that, look, if we're going to achieve this 2-degree warming scenario and limit warming to 2 degrees, we all need to take action. And that involves looking at net zero emissions by 2050. And that's why Labor's announced this policy to ensure that we're doing our bit internationally and we work towards that.
How old will you be in 2050?
I'll be 70-odd years old, Chris.
OK, you and I will catch up. You and I will catch up.
Hopefully I'm still around then. But, you know, my kids will be a lot older, and that's what this policy is about. It's about ensuring that we're handing on a cleaner environment and a safer environment and a better economy to our kids. And that's why I support policies that create stronger action on climate change.
Thanks for joining us, Matt. I appreciate it.